Leftism involves radical ideas that wish to destroy parts or all of society to advance economic development and social organization towards improving the human condition. Viewer discretion is advised. While not very original, I often enjoy Iceberg videos, finding the style easy to follow, educational, and exposing to ideas that are often unheard of or purely comical. I've looked through various political icebergs to create one cohesive iceberg that lists the most interesting theories, concepts, events, and ideologies that are relevant to the left-wing spectrum. Some of these entries are also provided either by me or my friends, and nearly all entries are serious, none of those anarcho-Stalinism with delusion fascist characteristic ideologies. Stars on the screen will determine my confidence and knowledge in the subject being discussed, with 1 being completely ignorant and full of guesswork, while 5 is I know it extremely well and shouldn't be wrong about it. Of course, not all leftist concepts have made it into this iceberg, so without further ado, get comfortable, turn on your microchip, and have a pronoun shake as we dive into the depths of the leftist iceberg. Concepts here at the tip are mostly well known and well understood by people of all ages. Most of these are umbrella terms, isms, and concepts that provide context for what exists further down the iceberg. Capitalism is a socio-economic stage in human development where the means of production are privately owned. Essentially, things like laborers, machines, and factories are controlled at the hands of a select few. Nearly all leftists criticize capitalism in some way, with many of them wishing to alter capitalism in a way that they like, or to completely abolish it in favor of a different system. Socialism can mean a lot of different things, so it's important to ask each socialist what it means to them. Some examples include a word synonymous with communism, a transition from capitalism to communism, or when there are social programs. Democracy generally refers to any sort of governance with any sort of electoral system, whether direct or indirect, by the people or by representatives. These systems tend to have multiple hierarchies and institutions with various roles, like judicial, legislation, and executive powers. Feminism is a term for any idea, ideology, or theory that is related to the emancipation of women to be equal in society. Patriarchy is a social system where men hold primary power and predominate in nearly all societal roles. Some examples are the gender wage gap, how men accused by women are often forgiven, how women are often slut-shamed while men are encouraged to be promiscuous, how women are more likely to be assaulted than men, and how femininity is often seen as a bad thing, especially if a man is acting or looking more feminine than traditionally acceptable. Racism is any discrimination on the basis of race. Race is seen by many leftists to be a social construct with material consequences and to be affected by societal conditions. Environmentalism is an umbrella term for any idea, ideology, or theory that is related to protecting or bettering the environment, ecosystem, and overall planet Earth. Most environmentalists believe that the Earth is getting warmer at an unnatural rate and wish to mitigate the damage from that, or to possibly stop it from happening altogether. Private healthcare sucks is a common leftist viewpoint that we should do away with private healthcare in favor of public or some alternative healthcare system. It is usually criticized as being way too expensive, especially in the US, and not equally accessible to all. Additionally, healthcare is seen as a fundamental and inalienable right that should be free to all who seek it. Democrats are not leftists. It is a common viewpoint among the American left that the Democrat Party is merely an illusion of progressivism while still supporting the status quo, capitalism, and the state. The phrase, two sides of the same coin, is often used to refer to Republican and Democrat parties, that both parties are funded by corporations via lobbying and only act in the interest of those corporations. Capitalism kills 20 million annually is a conclusion that some leftists come to when combining the death tolls of various factors under capitalism. Various statistics include 8 million deaths from a lack of clean water, 7.6 million deaths from starvation, 3 million deaths from curable disease, and 500,000 deaths from malaria. This roughly adds up to 20 million deaths a year. Authoritarianism is basically a vague term that refers to the exercise of force and is seen as a negative concept to many leftists, typically anarchists and libertarians. Some sects of leftism see authoritarianism as an inevitability or necessity. The overtone window is a theoretical lens for seeing what ideas are and are not socially acceptable. On the left-right spectrum, you can imagine the window in the center, where moderate conservatism and moderate progressivism is acceptable, while things outside the window such as communism and fascism are seen as less acceptable. DemSoc versus SocDem covers both democratic socialism and social democracy, which are separate ideologies that are easily confused for one another. DemSoc is an attempt to achieve socialism through legislation, voting, or more or less through the state apparatus. SocDem is when you have capitalism with more social programs for common people, in addition to things like taxing the rich and having universal basic income. Concepts here in shallow waters are more or less well known, but less understood by people who are not students of politics. Communism is a stateless, moneyless, and classless socio-economic system that existed prior to, but was largely popularized by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. The state communists wish to abolish is the institution and tool of the ruling class, and class specifically refers to social classes such as workers and capitalists. Steal your toothbrush is a meme making fun of those who confuse private and personal property. Leftists who want to abolish property refers to deeds, contracts, and private ownership of businesses, not toothbrushes, food, and video games. Marxism is a philosophical framework synthesized by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels as a means of interpreting material reality, usually in the critique of capitalism and the pursuit of communism. It is also an umbrella term for specific ideologies that have been formed with the Marxist framework. Anarchism is generally regarded as a society without capitalism, where hierarchies in society are only there if they are justified. Anarchism is more or less similar to communism, and likewise is also an umbrella term for more specific anarcho-ideologies. Libertarianism is a word that originated with anarchists before it was stolen and adopted as a more liberal, pro-capitalist, and moderate progressive ideology. In a leftist sense, it usually refers to those who oppose authoritarianism, want various rights, individualism, and autonomy. Non-sectarianism is more or less an ideology for having no ideology. Usually, people who are not familiar with leftism enough, have no specific tendency, or just know they're progressive, consider themselves non-sectarians. Marxist-Leninism is basically Lenin's interpretation of Marxism for Russia's conditions that some today see as universally applicable. They believe in socialism in one country, in contrast to world revolution. Vanguardism, which is the first-class conscious workers leading the revolution, and dictatorship of the proletariat, not to be confused with absolute dictatorships, basically the working class creating the state that ideally should wither away, so that society transforms from socialism to communism. ACAB is an acronym for All Cops Are Bad, which refers to the desire to abolish the police institution. The acronym has gained popularity after police were seen more and more as corrupt, untrustworthy, and unreliable, especially for marginalized people. Leftists who want to abolish police tend to want them to be replaced by police directly elected by the people rather than the state. Black Panther Party did good is a viewpoint not many people may have, because all they know is that the BPP was a communist group that opposed racism, capitalism, and formed community policing. What is less known is the programs they developed, such as the Free Breakfast for Children program, which feeds thousands of children nationally, In addition to free health clinics and providing groundbreaking research to sickle cell anemia, a disease neglected due to its African origins. Despite all this good, it was rigged from the start, with one of the co-founders being an FBI informant. They also sabotaged the BPP's relations with other groups and eventually managed to assassinate Deputy Chairman Fred Hampton. Zionism is a very controversial ideology. Leftists either believe it is essentially an ethno-nationalist ideology used to justify settler colonialism in Israel, while others see it as Israeli people exercising their right to self-determination. The question of debate comes to whether Palestinian people should suffer at the expense of that so-called self-determination. Antifa stands for anti-fascism. Under Trump's administration, Antifa was considered a terrorist organization, despite FBI investigations proving otherwise. It's also statistically proven to not be nearly as violent as media have fearmongered. While considered an organization, it better resembles a temporary trend, and it originates from a 1930s anti-fascist movement in Germany. The alt-right pipeline is a theory that certain conditions can lead people into becoming fascists. An example of such a pipeline could be around 2016, when famous conservative figures like Crowder or Ben Shapiro fearmonger the notion that Western society is decaying, consequently creating a scapegoat on who to blame for said destruction. Conservatives who watch this content can find themselves agreeing more and more with fascists when looking for solutions on how to preserve their Western values. Real democracy is a common leftist idea that democracy as it is commonly seen today is not real democracy, and that real democracy is when all people have direct power governing themselves rather than a representative, indirect, and overarching institution. This excludes liberal democracy, representative democracy, and nearly every republic in the world. Operation Condor was a United States-supported campaign of political repression, violence, and terrorism, including intelligence operations and assassinations against left-wing movements and leaders in South America, replacing them with right-wing dictatorships. Revisionism usually refers to Marxists who seek to modify Marxist theory in some manner, without rejecting its core framework. It can be used as an insult by various types of principle, orthodox, and Puritan Marxists. CRT stands for critical race theory, which is something many right-wingers think is bad without knowing what it is. It's based on critical legal studies, which argue that law is never truly neutral and full of loopholes. Non-white law professors adopted critical legal studies, forming CRT, in order to analyze systems of power, believing racism can effectively be resolved through anti-discrimination laws, and that social habits go deeper than legal terminologies. CRT itself just provides a lens and doesn't create solutions to end racism by itself. Sex positivism is a more specific feminist movement that seeks to normalize acceptance of kinks, polyamory, or having multiple partners, and asexuality. It is also concerned with accurate sex education in schools and the notion that sex work is socially liberating. The 1% refers to the fact that 1% of the world's rich elite own over half of the world's wealth. SJWs, or social justice warriors, refers to an overused right-wing insult and strawman argument against leftists. Those who use it usually think they are anti-white movements, that accepting gay rights will force everyone to be gay, or that supporting feminism will eradicate men and masculinity, when none of those things are true. Those who do unironically think these things are not taken seriously by the left, as it mitigates the real reasons and causes behind such social movements. Concepts below the water are more complex and understood mostly by people devoted to politics who have too much time on their hands. Trotskyism is a Leninist ideology that comes from Leon Trotsky. is critical of Stalin and post-Stalin USSR. They want vanguardism and the dictatorship of the proletariat, but also believe that capitalism isn't necessary for socialism. Instead, it can be skipped by allying with the peasantry and building industry with them during their time when feudalism was still relevant. Trotskyists also want proletarian internationalism with worldwide revolutionary collaboration. Trotsky is Colonel Sanders, is the meme and sometimes unironic conspiracy theory that because Leon Trotsky looks so close to Colonel Sanders that they must be the same person. Perhaps his assassination failed and he secretly changed his identity, becoming a capitalist and corporate owner of KFC. After all, diamond pickaxes only deal 5 damage. Maoism, MZT, MLM, refers to the distinction between Mao's synthesis of Marxist-Leninism applied to the conditions of China and the theories of Mao being seen as universally applicable. Maoism as merely an ideology for China is also known as Mao Zedong thought or MZT. They usually advocate for mass line, basically that the party reinforces what the people want, since there are contradictions between the two, and people's protracted war, basically a guerrilla warfare strategy involving countrysides and stretching enemy supply lines. Some believe that First World workers benefit from the Third World too much, and therefore lost their revolutionary potential, so only Third World workers can start a revolution, which is known as Third Worldism or Third World Maoism. Hoxhaism pretty much started when Hoxha, leader of Socialist Albania, refused de-Stalinization efforts in the USSR initiated by Khrushchev. It emphasizes orthodox Marxist-Leninism, while believing that the USSR shouldn't have changed since Stalin. Hoxha was critical of pretty much everyone, namely China, so most Hoxhaists are against Maoism. Hoxha was also quite against religion, which has carried over into many Hoxhaists. Pol Potism was an anti-intellectual ideology regarded as economically left-wing but culturally right-wing, supporting the Khmer Rouge genocide in Cambodia, hating landlords, religions, and money. Council communism is a form of socialism where workers run the state and economy directly through a system of workers' councils. They are seen as left of Leninism and are often critical of Leninism as well. Workers within these systems of councils can be recalled at any point to ensure they are doing the will of the workers, and workers would own their own workplaces. Being against political parties is also a large component of council communism. Mutualism is considered the first type of anarchism. Because it was new, it didn't have too much to be inspired by, and thus early mutualists believed in a free market, private property if the owner uses it for themselves, and collective ownership of the means of production. Instead of a state, it'd be organized into communes, with money vouchers instead of money. Early mutualists also founded the concept of credit unions. Georgism, also known as Geoism, is an ideology that believes that people should own the value they produce themselves. Natural resources in urban locations should be shared equally with all members of society. It follows Henry George's theories of land rights, public finance, economic efficiency, efficient land taxes, and social justice. Anarcho-primitivism basically criticizes the Industrial Revolution and its consequences, instead wanting to return to a time before with a desire for a hunter-gatherer agricultural society. Many anarcho-primitivists pursue a lifestyle known as achieving a feral state of being. This included learning primitive skills, unlearning human domestication, and focusing on instincts. Egoism, also known as anarcho-individualism, is an ideological philosophy started by Max Stirner. It usually emphasizes individualism, exercising ultimate self-desire, and believing that people act in accordance with their self-interest both consciously and subconsciously. Social constructs are seen as mere spooks of the human mind, and even society itself is seen as an illusionary institution. Egoism extends the idea of a voluntary organization known as a union of egoists, a collective organization that ensures conscious awareness of egoism is maintained. Assange and Snowden cases. Julian Assange is an Australian editor and founder of WikiLeaks. He was extradited after releasing Iraq war logs in October 2010, which documented U.S. war crimes, such as video images of journalists and unarmed civilians being gunned down, routine torture of Iraqi prisoners, and the covering up of thousands of civilian deaths and killing of nearly 700 civilians who were too close to U.S. checkpoints. He was also being tried for exposing a CIA hacking tool known as Vault 7, which enables them to compromise cars, TVs, web browsers, phones, and computer systems. Had he been extradited and found guilty, it would have allowed the government to use Espionage Act to charge any reporter who possesses classified documents and any whistleblower who leaks classified information. Very dystopian indeed. Northwoods was a plan for the US to sink their own boats, hijack their own planes, and even orchestrate terrorism in their own cities to trick the American public into supporting an invasion against Cuba. No matter one's opinion on Cuba, this operation shows the extent of how far America is willing to go to have what they want. All people in government had approved of this operation except John F. Kennedy, who supposedly declared war against the CIA, leading into a conspiracy that they assassinated him. Castro assassinations just refers to how the CIA attempted to assassinate Fidel Castro a total of 634 times, each and every attempt failing, and some of the attempts being rather comical, such as trying to poison his cigars, hiding explosives under sea cells since he loved scuba diving, and hiring his lover to kill him, in which he caught on, gave her his gun, and she couldn't do it, and made love with him instead. They even tried to drug him simply so he would look silly giving a speech, and tried to put thallium salts in his shoes to make his beard fall out. They hated him that much. Contra affair refers to a scandal between ContraPoints and, just kidding, a scandal in the US during the Reagan era.
A few months ago, I told the American people I did not trade arms for hostages. My heart and my best intentions still tell me that's true, but the facts and the evidence
tell me it is not.
The U.S. secretly funded right-wing rebel groups, the Contras, against the socialist country of Nicaragua. Doing so was prohibited by Congress. The intent of this was said to get Iran to release American hostages, but the sales were conducted before American hostages were even taken. An investigation was halted when large volumes of documents related to the affair were withheld and destroyed. Eventually, 11 convictions resulted, most of which were vacated on appeal, and the rest were all pardoned just before the end of George Bush's presidency. 2/3 of all wildlife refers to the fact that 2/3 of the world's wildlife has died off due to human activities. This comes from a Living Planet report in 2020 that monitored over 4,000 animal species including mammals, fish, birds, and amphibians all around the world. It found that their populations declined an average of 68% from 1970 to 2016. Pink capitalism is a concept to describe when corporations try to appeal to the LGBT community while only caring about remaining profitable. Pink corporations are often accused of only commodifying queer culture, with some even naming trans employees, while claiming to be non-discriminatory, providing insurance policies that fail to cover trans healthcare, or policies that require heterosexual marriage to cover a spouse, and seeing gender nonconformity and presentation as unprofessional in the workplace. And of course, it's always hilarious to see corporations change their rainbow logos immediately after Pride Month ends. Anarcho-nihilism is an ideology about destruction for its own sake, believing that society is beyond repair, or saving, and should be met with complete, non-negotiable hostility. Anarcho-nihilists usually reject unjust hierarchies, authority, and morality, and intersects with philosophical nihilism. Accelerationism is an umbrella term for any theory, idea, or concept that would further lead to capitalism's inevitable destruction. Accelerationists argue that harm done to the common people, if that happens, is outweighed by the end of capitalism, and the ability to create a society from its dissolution that would be free of exploitation, alienation, and oppression. USSR's illegal collapse is simply the belief that Gorbachev and Yeltsin's actions leading up to the dissolution of the USSR were all illegal, in part because many people at the time rioted against the decision, that people in Russia to this day have a positive opinion of the USSR, and that a majority of the Communist Party's members were against the collapse and tried to stop it. Kulaks deserved it is a controversial view that some have, when they believe that the Holodomor was a famine and not a genocide. The argument goes that those affected were mostly kulaks who deserved it because they were resisting collectivization, burning crops, and slaughtering cattle in rebellion, which worsened the famine in the first place. Therefore, getting sent to gulags was justified. Counter-arguments suggest that all famines are preventable and that the USSR could have accepted foreign aid instead of preserving its international image. Anti-sex positivism is the opposite of sex positivism. Believing that some kinks might be the result of trauma and coping mechanisms is considered kink-shaming, making anti-sex positivists pro-kink shaming. They also believe that sex work in order to survive under patriarchal capitalism isn't consensual and shouldn't be encouraged, in addition to believing that consent is merely a legal construct, since people can say yes while still feeling coerced, obligated, or not actually knowing what they want, especially when a plethora of disorders can lead to non-consensual consent. Anti-theism isn't just atheism, but people who want to take actions against religion. The label has some bad connotations, since some anti-theists have committed terrorism against religious groups, but the label can also refer to policies that mitigate theism, like secularization, banning religious schools, illegalizing indoctrination, teaching children critical thinking skills, and decentralizing religious institutions. CPUSA's FBI is a conspiracy theory that is exactly what it sounds like. Essentially, the Communist Party USA had genuinely worked with the FBI in the past, a large example being FBI agent Morris Childs, codenamed Solo, who attempted to re-establish contact between the CPUSA with China and the USSR. Another support for the conspiracy is their American exceptionalist views, liberal tendencies, and support for Democratic candidates. Adam Smith Landlords is a reference to multiple anti-landlord quotes from Adam Smith, referring to them as cruel parasites. Some of his quotes are on screen. MK Ultra is the CIA's plan to brainwash people through LSD and other psychedelic drugs. The experiments were often tested on unaware US citizens, one even committing suicide, and the whole experiment is pretty much Aldous Huxley's Brave New World dystopia made real. Jusei necromancy is a leftist meme that points out how Western media often accuses politicians in North Korea of getting executed only for them to be seen in the future. So rather than making the rational conclusion that the media lies and makes up stories for clicks and money, it's explained away that North Koreans can bring back people from the dead. Concepts here at the crust are reserved for the most devoted, niche offshoot ideas, forgotten or covert. Ideologies begin to dissolve into obscurity, and theories become more conspiratorial. Jusei. Speaking of Jusei, it's the state ideology of North Korea, primarily desiring self-sufficiency, the ability to protect itself especially from enemies with nuclear weapons, and complete independence even from other socialist countries. Philosophically, Jusei tends to be quite humanistic, stressing the importance of human beings above all else.
From the moment I understood the weakness of my flesh, it disgusted me.
Transhumanism is simply a belief that technology should be used to enhance and replace the physical body of a human being. Anarcho-transhumanists believe that new technologies are dangerous and incompatible with modern hierarchical structures, and can extend to a variety of theories and concepts such as singularity, anti-speciesism, and AI autonomy rights. Australia, CIA puppet. Before 1975, Australia could have been considered quite progressive with its Prime Minister Gough Whitlam. He was very critical of the CIA, who had influence within the ASIO, their intelligence division. He even threatened to take over and expose the US base at Pine Gap, a place WikiLeaks revealed allows the US to spy on everyone. Australia also openly opposed the Vietnam War, which a CIA station officer in Saigon said, "Australians might as well be regarded as North Vietnamese collaborators." This led up to a soft coup, as Whitlam was expelled from his position, making the conspiracy that there was CIA involvement. CIA owns media. Less conspiratorial than the previous CIA-related entry, CIA Director William Colby is a whistleblower who reveals that the CIA owns everyone of any significance in the major media. In interviews, he clarifies that most media is owned since the Clinton regime, in addition to stating that most media are nothing more than propaganda outlets of political parties, secret services, and rich elites. The CIA even goes as far as to pay European media to spin stories in favor of US interests. Recuperation is a sociological term referring to a process in which politically radical ideas and images are contorted, absorbed, and commodified within media culture and capitalist society, interpreted through a neutralized perspective, devoid of the original radical meaning. Affinity group, in a leftist sense, is a type of direct action organization proven useful for various activities, anywhere from guerrilla activities and insurrectionary terrorism to a simple study theory circle. It's a group of friends who set out to accomplish a goal or series of goals. It is not a permanent arrangement, but a structure of convenience. Tactically, it is seen as practically invincible, since they cannot be infiltrated when all members are supposed to be well-trusted, close, and able to adapt to situations. Max Stirner is Frederick Engels, is a conspiracy theory that suggests Engels created Max Stirner as a spook synonym to project his ideas. Arguments supporting this is that Stirner's ideas are somewhat similar to the early thoughts of Engels, that there is a lack of proper government documentation of Stirner, that there were irregularities with his grave, and that Marx and Engels didn't publish their criticisms of Stirner within their lifetimes. Counter-arguments against this conspiracy are the personal accounts of Stirner's ex-wife, a biography by John Henry Mackay, and both Feuerbach and Bauer have claimed to have met Stirner. Hauntology and Lost Futures refers to Mark Fisher's cultural adaptation of Jacques Derrida's concept of hauntology. Hauntology believed that we can only compare a moment in the present within the past and the anticipated future, and Mark believes that this is true with people's ability to imagine the future. He believes that neoliberalism has caused a cultural impasse. New technology used to allow for new cultural uprisings, but new technologies nowadays are only used to rehash already established cultural forms. If he is correct, it shows that our world is so hopeless that our only culture is recreating past cultures, and a major example of this would be synthwave music and cyberpunk aesthetics. Luxemburgism is not really an ideology, but more like a position one labels themselves as if they agree with Rosa Luxemburg's criticisms of Leninism, her criticisms of reformism and social democracy, and her expansions on capital accumulation. There is the belief, however, that the term Luxemburgism was pushed after her death to misrepresent her ideas and disrupt her organization of the Spartacus League. This leads us into our next entry. Bernie Sanders killed Rosa. Doesn't actually suggest he did. Since Bernie Sanders is a modern social democrat, it's a reminder that some believe social democracy is only pro-worker on the surface, but will betray workers when under threat of power. This is because Rosa Luxemburg was killed by a fascist mercenary group hired by the German Social Democratic government after she declared a free socialist republic in Berlin and criticized that only socialism could save the working class. Bookchin communalism is an ideology inspired by the thoughts of Murray Bookchin. He started as a Leninist and started agreeing with anarchism on hierarchy more. Eventually, he largely contributed to the environmentalist movement, believing that ecological crisis is a social crisis, that capitalism is destroying nature, and that society should be organized into directly democratic communes that operate in confederations. His ideas played an influential role in Rojava's development. MLK, killed by FBI, is a conspiracy theory that the FBI killed Martin Luther King Jr. a week before his "Where Do We Go From Here" speech, in which he mentioned his pro-socialist views, criticisms against the state, against capitalism, and his focus on the poor. Even his family believes he was killed by the FBI, who had been found to wiretap their home before his death as well. Yet in court, not enough evidence was provided to suggest that the FBI had done so, and socialist Martin Luther King Jr. has been whitewashed as a liberal who ended racism ever since. Neo-China arrives from the future. Comes from Nick Land's book Meltdown. He is an English philosopher, and the book seems to be a satirically philosophical art form that I personally don't find entertaining or humorous. He was originally an accelerationist, but it is said he's now some sort of fascist, unfortunately. Reviews of the book ranges from describing it as a perfect encapsulation of post-dystopian dystopia to a yardstick solid book of sci-fi buzzwords and pretentious run-on sentences. CCRU didn't exist. Continues the Neo-China entry. Nick Land was a part of a group called the Cybernetic Culture Research Unit at the University of Warwick, founded by Sadie Plant. Nick took over the project, transforming it into his own unorthodox center of experiments. They've created many fictitious works and gained an online cult following. Warwick University denies its existence, saying CCRU does not, has not, and will never exist. Illegalism is merely a lifestyle type of anarchism or egoism that embraces criminal activity. There are some theories and writings out there that attempt to justify types of criminality, either out of self-interest and or out of the belief that doing so is an attack on capitalism. Lenin's Testament myth. Lenin supposedly wrote a testament to criticize party members, warn against Stalin, and promote Trotsky as his successor. Arguments suggesting its illegitimacy is in the 13th Congress. Stalin repeatedly requested resignation. When he was unanimously voted to stay, he felt obligated, and this goes against the conspiracy that Stalin somehow remained in power against Lenin's will. Trotsky also stated that Lenin never left a testament or will, and that Lenin never offered him the post of chairman. Some argue that even if the testament is real, Lenin suffered strokes and was in no capacity to make rational decisions. Katyn massacre from Nazis. When Nazis invaded Soviet-occupied Poland, they reported that the Soviets killed over 10,000 Polish soldiers and officers. There's a conspiracy that this was a self-report, as supposedly bodies thought to have been buried in Katyn were found elsewhere. There were Nazi bullet casings found among bodies, letters found in pocket of corpses dated killings during Nazi occupation, and a Russian politician had declared that a document related to the massacre was forged. De Leonism is an ideology initiated by Daniel de Leon, who synthesized syndicalism and orthodox Marxism, essentially calling for militarized industrial trade unions to serve the interests of the working class masses. These trade unions would be united under a general union, which is to be the governing body of society, guiding society through a passive revolution in which the state will eventually wither away. Separated from the general union would be a political party that manages a constitution. Anarchist Cookbook by FBI is a conspiracy theory that the FBI wrote or supported the original Anarchist Cookbook. It is a book with various recipes and concepts supposedly to help anarchists and their revolutionaries on the streets. However, most of the advice and recipes are disastrous and can cause harm to those who follow them. the FBI supposedly tried to ban this book, despite it not actually being helpful to revolutionaries, leading to the idea that it was an attempt to get wannabe revolutionaries to harm themselves and get misinformed advice. There is another anarchist cookbook, said to be much more credible, put in the video description. Jacobin is CIA. Refers to a conspiracy theory that the leftist magazine group Jacobin Magazine is supported by the CIA. Arguments supporting this theory is the Gray Zone Project documented how Jacobin's talking points match the State Department's rhetoric on many geopolitical issues, that Jacobin has pushed pro-imperialist positions, that Jacobin has co-sponsored with activists funded by the US, and that Jacobin has praised a CIA-backed union for helping overthrow Poland's socialist government, and that CIA and FBI have funded left-wing publications in the past, such as Congress for Cultural Freedom. Monarcho-ideologies refers to various leftist ideologies that have to do with monarchism. This includes monarcho-bolshevism, believing that everyone is equal but one person is chosen by God to be the monarch and oversee a workers' revolution. Another is monarcho-socialism, advocating for a socialist government with a monarch as the constitutional head. Peronism is more of an umbrella term nowadays, but originally was the support of and thoughts of Juan Perón in Argentina. He more or less attempted to create a social democratic society in Argentina, largely influenced by fascist Italy, misunderstood it at that, and laissez-faire capitalism, seeing it as a third positionist alternative to both with an emphasis on workers' rights. In the modern sense, Peronism has no solid foundation. Some so-called Peronists are socially conservative and want to benefit from neoliberal capitalism, while others are more socially progressive, fighting for feminism, gender rights, and social welfare programs, but most of these Peronist types agree on post-colonial liberation. Anarchists started World War I. Is the historical fact that it was leftists who accidentally triggered a world war when they assassinated Archduke Franz Ferdinand in hopes of starting a revolution. Two were involved, Nedjelko Kabrinovic and Gavino Princip, both 19-year-olds at the time. The former was an anarcho-syndicalist and the latter was a fan of Bakunin and Kropotkin. Despite their actions leading to a world war, at least Princip believed a social revolution was still possible. Praxis School was a Marxist-humanist philosophical movement that originated in Belgrade and Zagreb, Yugoslavia, in the early 1960s. It opposed Leninism, Stalinism, and social democracy. It was very critical of Yugoslavia being bureaucratic and believed that workers' self-management was not radical enough. After it supported mass demonstrations in 1968 against poor living conditions, authoritarianism, unemployment, and the Vietnam War, Tito accused the movement of corrupting their students, and Praxis School was reformed. Despite this, they've been very influential to Western Marxists. Synthetic socialism is a theory that various socialist countries were synthetic in that they did not come out of a people's-led revolution, but instead through the oversight and intervention of the USSR, which was a large geopolitical hegemon. These socialist nations had to base their economies on the Soviet model and were a victim of social imperialism, which would explain why many socialist countries fell apart after the USSR dissolved. This is further strengthened when Khrushchev came to power and issued desalination policies that nearly all synthetically socialist countries had to follow. Animal Farm is CIA. Animal Farm is largely regarded as an anti-communist book, even though George Orwell himself said, and I quote, "Every line of serious work that I have written since 1936 has been written against totalitarianism and for democratic socialism as I understand it," end of quote. This leads to the fact that the movie adaptation for Animal Farm was edited by the CIA after the CIA secretly purchased the rights. Despite this, the book continues to be taught in many schools as anti-communist propaganda. Nechayevism refers to the thoughts of Sergei Nechayev, a Russian revolutionary who was considered a Bolshevik before the Bolsheviks. The primary motto of Nechayevism is the ends justify the means, with some theories being a socialist society establishing total control over the church and state in order to destroy them. individuals upholding a spiritual asceticism, and revolutionaries utilizing revolutionary terrorism. Nechayevism had a large influence on Vladimir Lenin and later the Bolshevik Party. Anarcho-hybridism is an ideology as new as 2020, which seeks to establish market socialism through either reformism or revolution as a transitionary stage towards a communal society. The state will be replaced with workers' councils, but it will not completely dissolve, only decentralize, so that the dictatorship of the proletariat can effectively counter reactionaries. Differing from traditional state socialists, hybridists want the means of production to be jointly shared between workers and the state, and it can be considered a modern rendition of mutualism or de Leonism. For many, this is where their familiarity ends, but for this iceberg, this is where the journey begins. The body is the heart of deep political thought, outcasted from even the shadows of the Overton window. IWW missing person cases. IWW is the Industrial Workers of the World, a workers' general union founded in Chicago, US in 1905. This entry refers to the fact that there are over 300 plus incidents where members were subjugated to violence, assaults, arrests, and murders. Over 170 members were murdered, as well as all of those incidents being well documented in the Department of Washington EDU website. Link in the description. A lot of these cases are pretty horrifying. Just out of a quick glance, it mentions massacres, lynchings, deportations, and federal roundups, which really exposes how anti-worker a state can be. 11/7/1917 happens every day is an entry I at first took literally, but with confidence I believe I understand the meaning. An article called Intervention of Red Spark on the question of October Revolution's continuing validity essentially states that the October Revolution was a continuation of the failed 1905 insurrection, which itself was a continuation of the workers' movement at the end of the 19th century in Russia. It concludes by stating that until the final insurrection, the revolution has developed over many centuries and continues today. I believe this is merely a homage to the ongoing struggle of the working class. Barracks communism was something I found when looking into Nechayevism in the previous layer, and has nothing to do with Barack Obama. Essentially, the term was coined by Karl Marx as a criticism against Sergei Nechayev. Barracks referred to bedrooms for workers who lived in or near the factories that existed in Tsarist Russia at the time. Karl Marx criticized Nechayev's idea of communism as being crude, authoritarian, forced collectivism, and where all aspects of life are bureaucratically regimented and communal. Communization theory. It's an ideology that takes a lot of inspiration from left communism and insurrectionary anarchism. As I understand it, the theory would suggest that communism is not instantaneous, but communism starts at a revolution's initiation. Since revolution is an event that can last a while, society during this time begins communal practices within the conditions of that revolution. As factories are seized, they are immediately communal, money is immediately rejected, classes are out the window, and the masses are organized into something other than the state. Gilles Deleuze's suicide refers to the conspiracy theory that suggests Deleuze had been murdered rather than killing himself. Arguments that support this conspiracy is that he was in the middle of writing his book, The Grandeur of Marx, that he had so proudly boasted about reading to a large audience. Yet, this book was never completed, for he supposedly killed himself. Additionally, his burial details are unknown, and prior to his death, it has been known that the CIA had an interest in reading leftist French theory, including Michel Foucault, Jacques Lacan, and Roland Barthes. Randomly generated insurrections is an entry that I believe refers to revolutionary spontaneity, but if you think you know what this entry actually means, please tell me in the comments. If I'm correct, spontaneous revolution is the idea that revolution will occur without the actions or guidance of individuals or groups, such as political parties or professional revolutionaries. This ties into spontaneous order, that amidst the chaos of a revolutionary event, order and organization will naturally follow. Frederick Engels Rosenkreuz is an entry I couldn't figure out. Perhaps there's a conspiracy theory out there that believes Frederick's last name was actually Rosencreuz and was a continued member of the Rosicrucian secret society. If anyone has any idea of what this alludes to, please share in the comments. Reverse historical materialism, I believe, refers to the idea that society is constantly digressing over time, rather than progressing. Marx and other historical materialists believe society has always had social class divisions, and that society is always progressing. Slave societies had the master and the slave, then came feudal societies which had the lord and the serf, and then came capitalist societies which have the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. Many Marxists believe that society then is progressing and advancing. The opposite of that would be reverse historical materialism, that past societies were better and that things are only getting worse now. Situationism refers to the beliefs and ideas proposed by the Situationist Internationale, a mostly European organization of various revolutionaries, artists, and political theorists in the late 50s. It started as an attempt to modernize theoretical ideas in the mid-20th century. They believe in the spectacle, that people are concerned with how they appear and identify with their job, rather than any deeper connection of self-identity. Situationism also largely involved a sort of lifestyle, where many of its participants would wander around the streets in defiance of rules and exploiting freedoms within capitalist society. They are largely critical of both Leninism and anarchism, despite largely influencing many anarchists. Masonic socialism may refer to the thoughts of Darren Lawners, a writer for a group of master Freemasons. He makes many comparisons between socialism and Freemasonry, and talks about its compatibility. Comparisons include that original Freemasons came from egalitarian guilds, where resources were managed and distributed equally, that Freemasons are taught brotherly love and to respect the poor, that both Freemasons and Socialists support science, stating that it can supply the means by which to attain certain ends, banish hunger, and cure disease, and that there were Freemasons involved in the Paris Commune and French Revolution, and that many colleagues of Hegel were Freemasons, in which Hegel was a person Marx took a lot of inspiration from. Horizontalidad, also known as horizontalism, is a social relationship advocating for the creation and maintenance of social structures for equal distribution of management power, resulting in a dynamic self-management with continual participation and exchange between individuals. It first took shape after the Argentine Great Depression, and this type of idea is seen to be a form of socialistic direct democracy. The concept is seen as replicable to those who are ignorant of political theory, in addition to breaking down hierarchies. A fact I find funny is that horizontalists call people they don't like verticals. Clown Army refers to the clandestine insurgent rebel Clown Army, which is an anti-authoritarian left-wing activist group whose members dress as clowns while engaging in nonviolent tactics. They've been known to be against corporate globalization, war, and imperialism. They come from the United Kingdom, where I thought all clowns came from, and the intentions behind the clown costume are something I find interesting. They believe that by dressing as clowns they can diffuse intense situations between protesters and police. And speaking of police, it's been revealed that their group was infiltrated by police since the beginning, which explains how they pulled off being clowns so well. Mondialization is a philosophical belief that believes that people should stop seeing themselves as nations, but rather as united peoples, all sharing one planet and its resources, while still maintaining respect for cultural differences. Mondializationists believe that a united human nation can better allocate resources towards large-scale projects, accelerating technological and social development, ending world hunger, and reducing wars and conflicts between humans. They're very critical of the United Nations, seeing it as an ineffective and corrupt example of ineffective mondialization. Bordiga, 1970 Lost Tapes. I believe I've found, but I don't know why this entry is so far down the iceberg, when the footage can be discovered as the first result of a Google search. I did a lot of digging to discover the context of this footage. If they were lost, how were they found? What struggles were made to rediscover them? What impact did the tapes have when they were? Those were the questions I wondered, but none of them got answered in my research. If you know, please share in the comments. Deep ecology is a philosophical belief of a certain ethics and morals in regards to the ecosystems and environmentalism. They believe that all living beings have value beyond the needs of humans, and that all things are connected within a natural order that must be preserved. Anything that isn't vital to a human that interferes with the natural world is a potential threat that must be evaluated. Agorism is a libertarian ideology that believes in open markets uninfluenced from theft, assault, or fraud. Agorists also believe in voluntary exchange and nonviolent revolution, with a primary core of their ideology being the theory of counter-economics. Counter-economics itself refers to direct action through black markets and gray markets, the practice of engaging in all human activities seen as forbidden against the state. Unlike communists who want communism or anarchists who want anarchy, agorists want a society called agora. NML is the German acronym New Marxlektur, which means New Reading of Marx. It is an ideology that largely criticizes Marxist-Leninism and social democracy. The idea itself mainly consists of a variety of revisions and rejections, most notably rejecting the idea that work creates value, instead believing that the social character of work is what creates value. They also reject the idea that the state is a manipulative instrument of a ruling class, instead seeing the state as a structurally necessary but relatively separate part of capitalism, and they reject theories that believe that a workers' revolution or the collapse of capitalism is inevitable. Chapmanism is an ideology that came from Max Chapman, the founder of the Workers' Party in 1940s America. They see the Soviet Union and other socialist states as a type of bureaucratic collectivism, and believe that these socialist states have created an entirely new third class within the world. Therefore, they reject both Trotsky's description of the USSR being a degenerated workers' state, and descriptions that considered the USSR state capitalist, instead seeing the ruling class of socialist states as an entirely separate from both workers and capitalists. Democratic mystification. Contrary to Marx, Engels, or other leftist ideas of upholding democracy, democratic mystification is an essay of criticisms and beliefs against democracy being the answer to various leftist systems. It states that defining democracy merely as the organization of humans is too broad and irrelevant, that it covers all societies from primitive times to now, that democracy was created after private property and the state, and sees it as inseparable from the state. The argument, then, is that communism is already a form of organization and does not need democracy, direct or indirect. Yet, how this type of organization looks is not specified. Layer 6. The Underbelly. Concepts here are just barely on the iceberg, just barely fathomable to the common person, but still enough to not be plunged deep into the dark abyss. Xenofeminism is a movement that claims to construct feminism for the modern era of advanced technology and societal complexity while criticizing capitalism, commodification, and alienation. It stands out from other feminist movements with its beliefs in technologies and science, believing that technology is fused with culture in a predictable feedback loop, that there is no explicit organized effort to repurpose technologies for progressive political ends, and it seeks to strategically deploy technologies to change the world. From their website, I quote, "If today science is dominated by masculine egos, then it is at odds with itself, and this contradiction can be leveraged. Reason, like information, wants to be free, and patriarchy cannot give it freedom. Rationalism must itself be feminism." Yellow socialism is an idea largely popular in the early 20th century, proposed by Pierre Bitry, a French politician. It involved an economic system alternative to Marxist socialism, advocating that workers' unions should exist parallel with groups of businesses. Therefore, Workers would in theory gain more of a share of profits through negotiations between each union and business group. The manager of the system would be, however, a strong authoritarian state. Babouvism is an ideology of the thoughts of François-Noël Babeuf, considered to be the first revolutionary communist before communism and anarchism had even existed as terms. He believed in a society that eradicated the need for humans to seek power or wealth over one another. Also believed that the French Revolution was but the precursor to an eventual final revolution. François-Noël had a coup against the French Directory known as the Conspiracy of the Equals, in which a proto-socialist society was established, similar to the Paris Commune that formed a century later. Extrapianism, or the philosophy of extropy, is an evolving framework of values and standards for continuously improving the human condition. It advocates for and believes that science and technology can advance enough to one day allow people eternal life. The ends justify the means, so a lot of time and effort can be dedicated, since the reward is possibly endless life full of ecstasy and fulfillment. The pursuit of immortality goes hand in hand with transhumanism. Frankfurt Socialism refers to the thoughts and theories that came out of the Frankfurt School. It was a sociological and philosophical school of various neo-Marxists that originated in Germany, but was exiled to Switzerland after Hitler came to power. The school's perspective is based on Marxian, Freudian, and Hegelian idealism, and applied methods of psychoanalysis and existentialism as a means of analyzing 20th century social problems. Neutron bombs in Paris Commune may refer to Jean-Frédéric Joliot-Curie, a physicist who helped discover artificial radiation leading to the invention of neutron bombs. His father was involved in the Paris Commune. Jean himself was a socialist who participated in anti-fascist organizations and vowed not to work against the Soviet Union. Since neutron bombs were invented until the 1950s, while the Paris Commune existed in the 1800s, I don't know what this entry actually refers to, so as always, leave your guesses in the comments. Luciferianism divides mostly into two branches, atheistic and theistic. There are leftist interpretations for both. Atheistic Luciferians uphold the symbolism, philosophy, and aesthetics of Luciferianism. They see Lucifer as a symbol of individuality and freedom, of critical thinking rather than mob rule, and Lucifer represents the hidden knowledge of the world. Some theistic Luciferians believe that God is evil and the source of many of the world's oppressions, that Lucifer, who is analogous to Prometheus, is the lightbringer of humanity, a revolutionary liberator who sought to challenge God to liberate the masses. Alien time capsule refers to a Soviet time capsule buried in 1967 and uncovered in 2017 that wrote, "We know our time is interesting, but yours is more interesting. We have built communism, and you are living under communism. We believe you are negotiating cultural and scientific cooperation with representatives of other extraterrestrial civilizations." This time capsule is the communist version of that flying cars meme. The optimism of these Soviets is almost depressing, since the USSR had collapsed 3 decades later, since the world couldn't be further from world communism, and that humanity is still very, very far from knowing any extraterrestrial civilizations. New synthesis, also known as Vakianism, refers to the thoughts of the Revolutionary Communist Party. While appearing like a standard movement on the outside, it has often been accused of being a cult. The main source of this is from the Kasama Press, None Letters to Our Comrades. When the leader Baba Vakin was asked if the RCP had become a cult, his reply was, "I certainly hope so. We've been working very hard to create one." The RCP believes in a vaguely defined new synthesis, while stressing the scientific method, and more so stressing Vakin's unquestionable ability to interpret such science. They see Maoism as the highest advancement of science. Gender abolitionism is the belief that society should be genderless, that the concept of gender labels, gender expression, and gender identity should be abolished. If gender equality is like the moderate left, then gender abolitionism is the extreme left. Under a genderless society, people would still be able to express themselves without any roles, expectations, or baggage of the gender social construct, nor would trans people have to exist, in that there would be no gender dysphoria, since there would be no genders to even assign at birth. Pulgasari is a North Korean knockoff to the original Godzilla movies made in 1985. The movie was regarded to be high quality for its time, and so comparable to Godzilla kaiju films that some people considered Pulgasari in their headcanon. The reason the movie was so great is that in 1978, Kim Il-sung had ordered intelligence to kidnap actress Choi Eun-hee, which lured in her husband, director Shin Sang-uk, to also be kidnapped. Despite being kidnapped, director Shin felt conflicted on his opinions of either South or North Korea, as South Korea had banned him from making movies, in comparison to the creative freedom he was allowed to have in North Korea. As for the plot of the movie, without spoiling too much, a blacksmith is imprisoned in feudal Korea, in which he makes a doll of a monster that accidentally touches the blood of his daughter. It transforms into Pulgasari, a bull-like kaiju monster that helps free the villagers from the oppression of the evil Korean emperor. Comrade Gigan. On this subject of Godzilla, the kaiju Gigan was supposed to be a representation of communism, coming from underground in Siberia. As a biological weapon created by the Soviet scientists, it was supposed to be red and gold, with a red glowing eye, the arm of a hammer and the other arm of a sickle. The idea was scrapped as the team felt it to be too inappropriate, and Gigan was changed to what we see today. Soviets killed JFK is a conspiracy theory that supposedly comes from an ex-CIA chief. It suggests that Lee Harvey Oswald was a KGB associate instructed by Nikita Khrushchev of the USSR to kill the American president as a part of Operation Dragon. Another conspiracy theory I found, however, is one that believes John F. Kennedy killed himself in order to somehow make the Soviet Union look bad. Fitzhugism is a rather extreme ideology for leftism, to say the least. George Fitzhugh was an American social theorist who was heavily critical of capitalism and of Adam Smith. He was also sympathetic to many socialist theories and movements, except for ones that were abolitionists. He wanted a better society for whites, but was racist, seeing black people as a grown-up with the mind of a child, who needed the slave institution for social protection. He also believed that slavery should extend to other races, including white people, just that only blacks are irredeemable. Other than that, he believed that there had to be a society that came out of pre-capitalist and pre-feudalist roots, but with knowledge of feudalism and capitalism. Yan Zishan thought was the beliefs of Yan Zishan for his warlord state, the Shaanxi clique. At the time, China was divided into many warlord states, and he believed in China reuniting. The guiding principles of his society were to be the three principles of the people as developed by Sun Yat-sen: patriotism, democracy, and socialism. But Sun Yat-sen specifically rejected Marxism and Russian socialism, instead only seeing Proudhon and Bakunin as true socialists. Zishan developed a 10-year plan involving the state control over the economy and the redistribution of wealth, which was inspired by Stalin's 5-year plan. But he was also anti-communist, rejecting the theory of inevitable class war and economic determinism. Goulash communism is the specific ideology of the Hungarian People's Republic. It advocated for increased liberty of political opinion and dissent to be expressed, being more concerned with public opinion than other socialist states. It also believed that the goal of the party was to serve the masses rather than command the masses, and hoped to allow for more self-expression and self-management of workers. Imre Nagy, a Hungarian politician, criticized Khrushchev's Soviet Union for straying from the idea of socialism in one country, in which Khrushchev returned stating that the Soviet Union would not tolerate deviation from their socialism. Volskyism refers to the beliefs of A. Volsky, a Polish revolutionary. He believed that the intelligentsia, those with high education and degrees, had the class interest to oppose manual workers, since their unproductive labor depended on preserving a monopoly on education at the workers' expense. He believed, in capitalist countries, that manual workers could organize mass general strikes until their wages matched that of intelligentsia, so that they could gain a socialization of knowledge, and he believed that violent revolution should only be carried out by those manual workers, the unemployed, and the peasantry. Lin Incident Project 571. Lin Bao, vice chairman of the Communist Party of China, died in an aircraft carrying him and several family members in Mongolia at 3 a.m. on September 13, 1971. Allegedly, after attempting to assassinate Mao Zedong and defect to the Soviet Union. This assassination attempt was given the codename 571, a coup d'etat attempt against Mao Zedong by the supporters of Lin Bao. It is believed that Lin Bao wasn't actually involved in the plot, but perhaps instead his son, Lin Leguo. PUT is short for Progressive Utilization Theory, or Peronism. It's an ideology based on the ideas of Prabhat Rajan Sarkar, which opposes both communism and capitalism. PUT involves a decentralized world government divided into self-sufficient locally governed zones, divided into 4 social classes including workers, soldiers, acquisitors, and intellectuals. There would be a Bill of Rights for humans, plants, and animals, in addition to laws that prevent elitism, exploitation, and class conflict. Additional beliefs include redistribution of wealth, nationalization of certain industries, cooperatives, and regulated markets, all managed under intellectuals who are able to lead society. Layer 7. Bottom of the Ocean. The bottom of the ocean is a resting place, where once the average person struggled to understand such extremes of leftism, they are now in the process of accepting the dark abyss. Posadism shows where we're at in this iceberg. J. Posadas was an Argentine Trotskyist who led the Fourth International. Nuclear holocaust was a scare of the 60s, in which they saw it from an accelerationist perspective. They started taking interest in aliens, that they must be as socially advanced as they are technologically advanced, that is, that they must be communists. Posadism became shaped into the idea that Earth should be nuked so that aliens can rebuild society into communism. It also believes that humans can learn to communicate with dolphins and can learn to reproduce asexually. Comrade Jim Jones. Most Americans have probably heard of Jim Jones, the mass suicide cult leader, but little know of his leftist origins, which weren't as dark as one would think. He read books by Marx, Stalin, and Mao as a child. In college, he was a member of the CPUSA. FBI constantly harassed him, so he disguised Marxism behind religion and founded the People's Temple. People joined his cult for the good things it did, such as creating soup kitchens, raising money for the poor, and helping prisoners and drug addicts seek rehabilitation. He also helped desegregate Indiana, earning the Martin Luther King Jr. Humanitarian Award. Whether it was the drugs, money, influence of William Barham, or always in his nature, the cult started being exposed for the worst as members defected, revealing horrible things. Journalists and investigators started poking around, but when some were killed, Jones took many to his commune in Guyana, forcefully injecting them with cyanide. Around 900 people died, including 300 children. The People's Temple's funds were supposed to be donated to the Soviet Union, but the guy in charge of that also killed himself. It is said by Jeff Glynn, if Jim Jones had been hit by a car and killed somewhere towards the end of the 1950s, he'd be remembered today as one of the great leaders in the early civil rights movement, and he would have earned that reputation. That makes what happened more tragic. He had the ability to do great things, and instead, he used his talent for provocation, for manipulation, and as a result, he's remembered today as a terrible person. Frankly, he earned that. Marx is the Gnostic demiurge. For those who don't know, Gnosticism is a belief system that is almost as old as the Christian Church. The core principles of most types is dualism, believing in both physical and metaphysical aspects of reality. Gnosis itself is Greek for knowledge, and Gnostics believe in secret knowledge that is only revealed to a select few. Lastly, they believe in two separate beings. One is unknowable and supreme, the other is a malevolent creator known as the Demiurge. Believing Marx to be the Demiurge suggests him to be the physical incarnation of a being who creates with malevolent intentions. In my research, I also discovered Gnostic Marxism. Rather than believing Marx to be the Demiurge, some Gnostics believe that Marxism itself is a form of Gnosticism. Marxism is Gnostic because both believe that the order of being is inherently unjust, that man has been alienated in this unjust order of being, and that change can happen if man changes their consciousness via realization of their identification with the creative force in existence and self-creation, that the world is ignorant and controlled by manipulative forces that want to prevent this self-realization via hidden knowledge. The Room soundtrack, played by Thomas Sankara. I don't know why this entry is so far down the iceberg, but I believe this refers not to the 2003 movie The Room, but to the band formed in 1979 in Liverpool. It does check out that Thomas Sankara, considered Africa's Che Guevara, could have very well played this song, but if there's any specific footage of him listening to it, I couldn't find it. If someone does know of such, or knows what this entry actually refers to, then let me know in the comments. Tikkun is a term used to describe a collection of ideas from a French group known as the Invisible Committee. As an ideology, Tikkun is seen as a synthesis between communization and insurrectionary anarchism. They believe that communism starts not just during the revolution, but that the struggle against capitalism itself is communism, leading to a lifestyle of living in communism within capitalism. It also believes in the coming insurrection, an inevitable conflict between the agitated masses and the state. They've also coined their own terms and ideas, such as an imaginary party, that is, the unorganized portion of the human population that rejects capitalist society. Bloom is a word to describe a mood of personality when experiencing alienation within society, which may lead one to commit crimes or become an agent of the imaginary party. Think lumpen proletariat or class conscious. And zone of offensive opacity, or zoo, a physical location or community which cannot be accessed within capitalist society, often as a space for armed organization to attack capitalism. David Harvey podcasts on number stations is probably a literal entry, that there might be number stations out there that play David Harvey's anti-capitalist podcasts for some reason. I've found no speculative evidence of anyone previously suggesting this, so if anyone knows if there is actual number stations producing David Harvey's content, show me in the comments. Muladorosism refers to an ideology of the Union of Muladorosi that argued that a Tsar was compatible with the Soviet system, advocating for a hybrid of Soviet-style monarchism. The group started as anti-communists, seeing the Soviet Union as occupiers of Russia. Eventually, they made claims of being the next Soviet party. As the group became increasingly pro-Soviet, much speculation was made of the secret police's involvement, which was confirmed when the founder was spotted in a cafe in France speaking to several Soviet diplomats, in which the Union of Muladorosi eventually dissolved. Meta-anarchism, also known as ontological anarchism or delusion anarchism, is a belief that anarchy is inherently a multiplicity, a college of varying and intermingling anarchies, rather than a singular specific form of anarchism. Meta-anarchism is supposed to constantly evolve, be added upon, reworked, and reiterated. An open-source ideology of intellectuals where no one has a monopoly on what defines meta-anarchy. Post-structuralist theory seems to be the favorite philosophy of meta-anarchists, who often refer to those they disagree with as structural fascists. Soulism, also known as ego-communalism or post-humanism, is a semi-theistic ideology that believes that it is in everyone's best interest to share, including private and personal property. It also believes that there are hierarchies, not just in the state or in capitalism, but in gravity and in everything. Therefore, humans must transcend to a plane of existence where hierarchy is abolished. Solists also believe that all are connected and harmonized into a concept of oneness, that the ego is the soul, and that there are pocket universes that can be visited. Deleuze-Guattarian thought refers to the thoughts and theories between French philosopher Gilles Deleuze and psychoanalyst Félix Guattari. Together they've written the books Capitalism and Schizophrenia, Anti-Oedipus, Kafka, and What is Philosophy? They were post-structuralists and critically against theories with fixed alibis. They believed that fascism was the exploitation of desire to repress people, criticized the thought logic of those who wanted to be led by others, noted the way capitalism seems natural but is not, that desire is always suppressed because society currently represses desire, and various other complex critiques. Ant-communism may refer to the personified comparisons and observations of ants and similar behaving insects like bees. When ant colonies get to a certain size, the queen can be seen getting pushed around and controlled by the workers, but still kept alive to keep the colony alive. When colonies have multiple queens, workers are less lenient and will kill queens they don't like for as long as one lives. Some workers even forcibly move their queens where they want them to be, though I'm not confident that this is what is being referred to when saying ant-communism, so, if anyone knows better, let me know in the comments. Lenin Reborn is a rather silly story. In Lenin's mausoleum in March of 2019, a man could be heard shouting "Rise! Rise!" as he splashed various oils and herbs onto Lenin's corpse in an attempt to resurrect him. He told police his plans was to bring Lenin back to help re-establish the Soviet Union. Doctors diagnosed him in need of psychiatric help, and he was fined 500 rubles. Related to this is the conspiracy theory ongoing in Russia that many believe the corpse of Lenin is merely a wax replica, while authorities insist that the body is the real corpse of Lenin. Eros and Civilization pilot episode is an entry that I believe I found the source to, but it would require way more digging than I'd like. I believe this refers to the YouTube podcast channel Philosophize This. There are hundreds of episodes that are each around a half hour long. None of them have pilot in the title, so I'd rather not dig for them. Yes, I'm being a lazy commie. Perhaps there was an episode that was controversial and got deleted, but I haven't found any articles or social media posts that regard this YouTuber, let alone any pilot episode. So if anyone knows what this entry alludes to, let me know in the comments. Quantum Physics of Pol Pot may refer to Kasol Och, a survivor of the Khmer Rouge genocide, who seems to be a conspiracy theorist of a variety of beliefs. Some beliefs include that quantum physics can help open up portals to other dimensions, that Donald Trump is the president of the world who will release planetary thought control on all of humanity by 2026, that AI can help raise human consciousness and psychic ability, and that Henry Kissinger is responsible for the Cambodian genocide. The O refers to the organization. It was a new communist movement group that resided in Minneapolis Cooperative Wars, in which members of the group competed with other locals for control over workers' co-ops in the 1970s. By the 80s, it had become an extremely secretive and controlling cult, dictating what members could do, say, and who they could have a relationship and children with. Even amongst themselves, they were paranoid and only communicated through secretive practices and cryptic memos. The new communist movement era also inspired the Democratic Workers' Party, a Marxist-Leninist and feminist group that consisted mostly of lesbian women. The founder, Marlene Dixon, was considered to have a heavy personality cult, who had the help of Robert J. Lifton's ideas on brainwashing theories and thought reform. Wander along the bottom of the ocean enough, and you might just slip through the cracks into the Marina Trench. Concepts here bear little to no resemblance to the common world, but are instead twisted into demented figments of reality. Neo-Bolshevism is regarded as the corruption of communism. It hears all the worst things about the Soviet Union and says, yeah, I agree with that. Society would be a pan-Slavic Eurasian superstate based on George Orwell's 1984, a society filled to the brim with altered history, secret police, propaganda, and en masse surveillance. Anarcho-anarchism is similar to meta-anarchism but is more of a philosophical view that anarchy itself is too authoritarian, since it is an idea that can be controlled and organized. Even having organized thoughts and actions both mentally and physically is too authoritarian. Ulprodem stands for ultra-progressivist democracy, which is concerned with rooting out and tackling the sources of human suffering. This pursuit of action against human suffering is referred to as the omnivore. It seeks for the world to be united so that all resources can be dedicated to improving the human condition. Ulprodem is merely a means to an end, not an end goal in itself. It ends when human suffering ends, when only a democratic world government remains. In achieving world unity, the analysis of relations of power is one of the core objectives, philosophically believing that all forms of power are separate, but linked within a socially constructed line. Absolute individualism on one side, and absolute totalitarianism on the other. By determining where relations of power and social systems exist on this line, Ulprodemists can figure out the best way to accelerate and abolish them. Hierarchy is a post-Marxist concept written by Gabriela Parmio and Peter Leinbach. In their book The Many-Headed Hydra, Sailors, Slaves, Commoners, and the Hidden History of the Revolutionary Atlantic, it refers to the social order of life at sea, the governance of the waters. Labor conducted offshore is heavily neglected, according to these two authors. Hierarchy had referred to the imperial organization and control of maritime space during the construction of a global system of capitalism since the late 16th century to the present. It also refers to the organization and lives of seafaring people, the work they do, and how they cooperate in a dangerous environment. Gabriela and Peter argue that the sea is rarely seen as a real material place of struggle, which they call terracentrism. They refer to the ship as a floating factory, where workers from different backgrounds come together as wage laborers to toil cooperatively under a captain who forced their cooperation with a complex division of labor and violence. Anarcho-entertainment is an ideology that believes that all members in an anarchistic society should be connected to a singular, all-encompassing social media. Popularity on the social media determines the status and benefits in society, with the most popular of individuals being the rulers of society. It is believed that this sort of system would have justified hierarchies in that it is voluntary, that popularity is the most direct form of democracy. 83, 19, 1, 95, 26, 77 is an entry I couldn't find anything about. Perhaps it's someone's IP, perhaps it's the code to unleash a country's nuclear arsenal. I even tried to convert the numbers to letters, and then enter those letters into an anagram solver, but it leads to nothing that I could find. As a math problem, the answer is negative 135, whatever that could mean. Or perhaps it's a joke entry meant to look spooky and unknown. Nonetheless, if anyone has any idea about this entry, let me know in the comments. Black Lilyism, or Lise Noire in French, is an unironic French anarcho-monarchist movement that has taken inspiration from Pol Pot's Khmer Rouge, Neo-Luddites, Situationism, and Communalism. It desires to achieve a society called Hyper-France, which would be a highly decentralized agrarian welfare monarchy with nationalized banking and regulated technology. It also wishes to abolish modernity, technology, institutions, and social systems of the modern era. Socially advocates for the embracement of the ancient man, and is thus homophobic, which means someone should make them aware of ancient Greeks and their gay orgies. Secondly, they're also very anti-Muslim and only want what they consider true French people into their version of Hyper-France. The Gulf War did take place, is an entry I might have found out. There is a series of essays written by French theorist Jean Baudrillard titled The Gulf War Did Not Take Place, which, as conspiratorial as the title sounds, isn't about a conspiracy theory at all. Instead, he believes that the war wasn't a war, but instead an atrocity masqueraded as a war. The American military hardly engaged in combat with the Iraqi army, suffering few casualties with overwhelming air power. Little was made known of the Iraqi deaths. Thus, the fighting did not really take place. All that spectators got to know about the war was in the form of propaganda imagery, which made it difficult to distinguish what truly happened in the conflict. In Layer 3, about WikiLeaks that exposed atrocities against Iraqi civilians and torturing, Sean might have been right. Yet, with the emphasis on did in this entry, perhaps the entry is about the opposite of Jean's thoughts, that it was in fact a war. Perhaps the presence of the US military was more prevalent. It is because of did being capitalized that I feel less confident about my findings for this entry, so if anyone has a better idea of what this means, let me know once again in the comments. Posetism is a belief that Posadas' name was actually Posetis. Kidding. It's an often unheard of ideology that was created within and during Nazi Germany. It comes from Fritz Klopp, who founded the Werewolf League of German Men and Front Fighters, aesthetically mirroring Nazis with grey uniforms, Nordic runes, skulls, black flags, and red armbands. Yet, as an ideology, it sought to overthrow the Weimar system, replaced by a greater German Third Reich, free of class distinctions and capitalist exploitation. Posetism comes from Latin possedere, to possess. Thus, it seeks to reorganize property relations. The ideology is against both capitalism and socialism, seeing capitalism as the private concentration of property, resulting in unbridled egoism and selfish disregard for the people, and seeing socialism as an unhealthy concentration of property in state hands that deteriorated the people's drive and ambition. Klopp proposed mass nationalization of all land and property into the state, which would ration it out for a private possession as widely as possible, so that everyone would have a stake in land and business, seeing such a society as the perfect balance between egoism and egalitarianism. Dark mutualism refers to a belief that mutualism started off innocent and concerned with progress, and subsequently anarchism ran into an impasse due to the influence and embracement of communism. It believes that mutualism lost progress and that the idea of progressivism has been corrupted. It argues that Proudhon needs to be revisited with serious revision. Lastly, it connects Proudhon's expressed doubts and concerns with mass politics as a justification for implementing fascistic elements into his idea of society, such as that federated unions need a state, and that society needs a command economy. Exocratic socialism is a variation of exitocracy, where every form of government within the world is a socialist state without borders. The logic of this ideology is, don't like it? Move, as anyone can move to either socialist state to choose which form of state and culture they like best to live their life in. Each state is to correspond to the separate wills of its parties, peoples, ethnicities, and cultures, with the only unifying components of these states being that they must remain socialist, must provide its people the ability to freely move to another state, no matter the cost, and that it can not restrict, reduce, or deter anyone from desiring to move to another state. Communist civilizations and Earth's core is an entry I didn't find anything about, but I can largely guess what it refers to. There's a conspiracy theory that believes that the Earth is hollow, that beyond the crust and the great pressures of the Earth's central gravity is an inversion of the planet, a world without a sky but instead a ceiling. A lot of these hollow Earth theories interconnect with other conspiracies, such as an entrance to Agartha being in Antarctica. So with that, it's probably safe to suggest that this entry refers to a possibility that there are communist civilizations within Agartha, or perhaps that if there were civilizations within Agartha, they'd be communists. Perhaps, if we nuked the world, they'd come out and help us rebuild, uphold hollow Poseidism. Mazdakism is an Iranian religion and offshoot of Zoroastrianism. Zoroastrianism still exists and was the state religion of many Iranian empires. A Zoroastrian Mobad named Zardusht founded his counter-religion in the early Sasanian Empire. It is named after the prominent and powerful advocate of this religion, Mazdak. The historical context, if I am correct, is that Mazdak and Zardusht initiated a revolution. Mazdak saw the state as an obstacle to the realization of the ideal. He wanted equal distribution, not by land reform, but by people taking what they need from those who had a surplus. He said, and I quote, "If someone can take what is in people's hands and obtain their property by theft, treachery, trickery, or blandishment, or in any way whatever, that is allowed and permitted to him. The surplus which is in the hands of those who have more than others is forbidden to them, so that it may be distributed equally among the servants." End of quote. Their revolution involved plundering the homes of the rich and powerful, eventually forming a society considered by historian Patricia Crone to be the most noteworthy example of pre-modern communism. Property belongs to everyone collectively, with no exclusive rights of ownerships and the means of production. Autopoiesis is an entry I considered excluding, but after some further reading I realized that it could have an influential impact for various left-wing theorists in a similar way to class conflict, dialectical materialism, or psychoanalysis. Autopoiesis originated as a biological term to differentiate living and non-living things. An autopoietic system was defined as a network of interrelated component-producing processes, such that the components and interaction generate the same network that produced them. This concept eventually entered sociology when Luhmann proposed that while social systems are self-organizing and self-reproducing systems, they do not consist of individuals, roles, or acts as commonly conceptualized, but exclusively of communications. Luhmann views communications rather than actions as the elementary units of social systems. The chain of communications can be viewed as a chain of actions which enables social systems to communicate about their own communications to choose their new communications. It draws a clear distinction from autopoiesis and observation, but also acknowledges that observing systems are themselves autopoietic systems. In short, become an anarcho-poieticist or a Marxist autopoieticist today. Seaman Hitler. Topping off the end of Layer 8 with a banger, it isn't as absurd or as silly as it seems. No, this doesn't refer to the fact that Hitler injected bullcum into his veins. This refers to Seaman Konstantinovich Hitler, a Red Army soldier who fought in World War II on the Eastern Front, awarded the Medal for Courage. He was born in 1922 in Ukraine and died in 1942 in Russia. While these facts alone may not deserve such an entry to be so far down, it certainly looks comical and honestly, in my opinion, deserves its spot in the dark. Reality has completely dissolved. There is no going back. Sentient capital refers to the belief that Marx's view of capital is that it is an actual entity, a being with a mind of its own. This belief stems from Marx's comments on James Mill, written in 1844, that says, and I quote, "The essence of money is the mediating activity or movement, the human social act by which man's products mutually complement one another, is estranged from man, and becomes the attribute of money, a material thing outside of man. Since man alienates this mediating activity itself, he is active here only as a man who has lost himself and is dehumanized. The relation itself between things, man's operation with them, becomes the operation of an entity outside man and above man, owning to this alien mediator. Instead of man himself being the mediator for man, man regards his will, his activity, his relation to other men as a power independent of him and them. His slavery, therefore, reaches its peak. It is clear that this mediator now becomes a real god, for the mediator is the real power over what it mediates to me. Its cult becomes an end in itself." And it is due to this quote that some people take Marx literally, that he is talking about actual material subordination to an actually existing intelligent entity, and that capitalism is an occult mode of production. Autarchism, or in this case, left autarchism, first and foremost requires one to believe that there are things, such as cryptids among other mythical entities. For some, This also extends to those who choose to believe they are a mythical entity, known as otherkin. As an ideology, it advocates for the persecution against mythical, supernatural, and non-human beings, with a socialist state organizing this persecution before the state can wither away, before communism can be established. Justification for this persecution is a belief that they are a threat to humans, possibly wanting to manipulate, feed off, enslave, or control humans. Only human workers have the right to exist on Earth and run its social systems, with some believing that all capitalists are non-humans, which explains why it's so hard to sympathize with them or understand their greed or their ability to commit human atrocities. If this is true, then Frederick Engels is proof that some non-human bourgeoisie can be class traitors. Some autarkists believe that allies of the human workers' revolution should be spared, tolerated, and perhaps treated as equals. Necropolitics. If biopolitics is about making life, how is the presence of so much death explained? Necropolitics refers to a theorized observation of modern society that the neoliberal era is full of terror and insecurity, bringing new and unprecedented forms of biopolitical governmentality in which necropower, or the technologies of control through which life is strategically subjugated to the power of death, operates significantly with and alongside technologies of discipline and the power to make life for an increasingly authoritarian politics which governs through economic rather than social terms. What a runoff sentence. Bioposadism, also known as pandemic posadism, is very similar to posadism, sharing a lot of beliefs with it, but in addition to the pursuit of a nuclear holocaust, is the possibility of accelerating capitalism's demise through the use of a supervirus pandemic. Bioposadists see COVID-19 as a net positive, and believe that the negative effects on the world capitalist economy have only begun, hoping to see it worsen. Of course, aliens would help humanity recover from the pandemic after the collapse of the economy, rebuilding society into a communist utopia. RRACC stands for Revolutionary Resurrectionist Accelerationism. It is a revolutionary pessimistic belief that there is no and will no longer be any revolutionary potential. Therefore, anti-capitalists across the world should instead use capitalism to invent the technology to either clone or resurrect historical figures who are the only ones that can save the world and destroy capitalism. Alternatively, rather than clone or resurrect historical figures, it could slowly build an army of clones or of the dead. Unironic Jews say necromancy. If enough workers came together, they can collectively or cooperatively start and manage such a business, which wouldn't be targeted by governments or agencies until it's too late. Workers of the world, resurrect. Spinoza's dark substance. Baruch Spinoza was a 1600s philosopher who defines substance as that which is in itself and is conceived through itself, which means that it can be understood without any reference to anything external. He also defined God as a substance consisting of infinite attributes, each of which expresses eternal and infinite essence. And since no cause or reason can prevent such a being from existing, it therefore must exist. Spinoza goes further into believing that only God exists, whatever is in God, and nothing can exist or be conceived without God. So if I was to go out on a limb, perhaps dark substance is some edgy way of explaining atheism, or perhaps it refers to the absence of God, a void, that which is nothing, doesn't exist, and has never existed or ever been conceptualized. This could even be extended further that if there are things that do not exist, then that would disprove God. That is my guess, but if anyone can confirm what Spinoza's dark substance refers to, let me know in the comments. Kinarchy seems to be a spiritualistic philosophical ideology. I'll let the introduction from its website do the talking. Kinarchy is a rhizomatic portal into a living world, a way of coming to meet the denizens of the world openly and honestly, so that you can understand what each one wants to be and how it wants to live, and then a way of unfolding and honoring these perspectives through integration with your own worldview. More than just a philosophy of politics, Kinarchy is about living ethically in the face of despair, about being meaningful, because that brings ancient powers to our aid. It embraces the mysticism of gods and heroes, while open-heartedly rejecting utilitarianism and consequentialism as inappropriate responses to crises. Our deepest dreams is to follow a way that embraces meaning beyond despair, beyond death, beyond the ontological hierarchy. We embrace the madness of beauty, so we can shield ourselves from the madness of nightmare." End of quote. Whatever that means. Kropotkin's sightings in Relay is an entry I assume to be a meme. I know Relay is the lost city mentioned in H.P. Lovecraft's Call of Cthulhu. I also doubted that Kropotkin could even possibly be referenced in this short story or any stories at all, due to how racist and right-wing H.P. Lovecraft was. Yet, to my surprise, I did find an interesting article connecting Kropotkin to Cthulhu that is worth sharing. The article is called Cthulhucene: Ecological Catastrophe, Cosmic Horror, and the Politics of Doom, written by Sean Parson. Similar to Mark Fisher's comparisons to Lost Futures, Sean notices that activism in the 1960s imagined utopias, and even the 1990s anti-globalism movement saw other worlds, and yet today, conversation has shifted towards dystopias and doom. He points to how the right supposedly benefits from this universal pessimism more than the left, and he connects today's vile collection of racism, xenophobia, misogyny, and anti-Semitism as analogous and metaphoric of Lovecraftian horror. This all leads up to the ideas of revolutionary pessimism, a dark age for leftism. How this relates to Peter Kropotkin is Sean believes Kropotkin inspired the early Russian nihilist movement, all of this providing the context for modern pessimists to turn to. It ends by acknowledging the point to horror, how it affects the human's innate survival mechanisms, how leftists can't give up in the face of incomprehensible oppressions and exploitations, therefore concluding that leftism must enter a survival mindset in order to avoid or delay catastrophe. The article is interesting and serves as a good cover for this entry, but I doubt this is exactly what the entry refers to, so once again, if anyone knows better, let me know in the comments. The Final Understanding is an entry that isn't just on a few leftist icebergs I saw, but also on a few conspiracy theory icebergs as well. From what I've found, I believe it refers to a person discovering that there is no such thing as truth, that saying "I think, therefore I am" is a lie predicated on faith. There will never be the evidence to confirm reality, let alone the self. Human rationality is only human. Science is only a human interpretation of what we think is real. The understanding of having no understanding. The knowledge of knowing nothing. That is all for the Leftist Iceberg. It was very different from the usual content I upload, but I also knew I wanted to do a video like this for a long time. I have to thank many of my friends on Discord who added to this iceberg. Exactly 56 out of 160 plus entries are provided by me and my friends. There were going to be 200 plus entries, and technically there still is in the description. I should have added a list of entries that didn't make it into the final iceberg, since I really didn't want to make the video too long. Some of the entries I didn't add purely because I couldn't figure them out, and didn't want to have to say, "If you know what it is, let me know in the comments," too many times. There may be a part 2, depending on demand and if a lot of people help out answering the unknown entries. This has been the Leftist Iceberg Explained. If you liked this video or learned something new, leave a like. If you didn't, then leave a dislike. Subscribe for more content like this.